Hello, this is Jakub Holi presenting the Minimalist Introduction to Fulcro, which has been recorded for my workshop, Introduction to Creating Web Apps with Fulcro. If you want help learning Fulcro or Fulcro mentor and programming buddy, get in touch with me through my website.
I'm not going to talk about why things in Fulcro are the way they are. You can go to the Fulcro Minimalist tutorial and read the why Fulcro section there to read more. And it points you to more information. But why would we want to use Fulcro? Because it provides a complete integrated model and solution for building non-trivial business applications. Applications that have both front-end and back-end, which essentially all of them do. By integrated, it reduces substantially the amount of boilerplate you have to write to get anything done. And by being complete, you have most of the time all the tools you need to create such an application, and you don't need to add a ton of other libraries or make ad hoc solutions for things that you should expect from a business application framework to provide to you. It's data-driven, and I mean really data-driven, much more than any other similar framework I have worked with. So the UI is truly a function of data. If you have a problem, 95% of the cases, you don't mess up with the UI, you look at the data to find out what's wrong. It has been designed with the explicit purpose to make web app development sustainable. That means as the application ages or as it grows, so that the cost of developing and maintaining it doesn't go to the sky. So there's a lot of work on minimizing incidental complexity. And part of that is that it's very developer friendly, making it's very easy to navigate through the code base by just clicking on things, things that belong together are located together. And there is really good tooling, as you will experience today. So you don't need, when you want to get a new piece of data on the screen, you don't need to edit a number of different places. You don't have to search your code base for string IDs to find those related places. It's much more friendly. And it's also very customizable. Even though it's framework, it doesn't limit you as much as most frameworks do, because essentially anything you can plug in your own algorithm or solution if you want to. But of course, the more you want to change, the more work it will require from you. And finally, it's based on a Graph API, not REST, which in many cases provides a better, simpler solution. And there is a great talk by Wilker, which explains that, linked at the end of this document. So what is Fulcro? It's a full stack web framework for Graph API. What does that mean? It's full stack, so there's both front-end and back-end parts, and they were designed together. They are integrated, so there's really minimal effort in getting data between them. And on the front-end part, you have a tree of UI components. Essentially, every UI is a tree, right? You have a components, some boxes that contain boxes that contain boxes. And these components are React components, so it's based on React. And it talks to a Graph API on the backend, both to query for data and to affect mutations or to change something on the backend. Contrary to REST, where you have a number of different endpoints you have to talk to, you have just a single endpoint in a Graph API. And in REST, the endpoint gives you the data it has. But in a Graph API, the front end describes what subset of the available data it wants. And the backend fills in the data requested. In the case of Fulcro, we describe the desired data using queries in Eden query language, or EQL for short. And so you send in a query and you get back a tree of data. The part that's on the front end, that's what we call Fulcro mostly. And the part of on the back end, we call it's Pathom, which is Fulcro's twin library. And its responsibility essentially is to parse EQL queries and answer them with data. You as a developer code resolvers on the backend that are able to provide parts of that answer. And those resolvers typically talk to database such as Datomic or Postgres, or they could talk to a remote API or essentially anything. Pathom is normally running on the backend, but it's actually written in CLJ-C and can also run in the browser, which is fine for experiments, or if you want to use it as adapter for a remote REST API when you don't have your own backend, for example. So here we have a diagram of what the Fulcro application looks like. Here we have the front end, which sends EQL queries and mutations to the backend and is getting data tree back. And the backend has Pathom running, talking to some kind of data source. So let's zoom in on the front end. We have three important parts there. The UI itself, which is a tree of React components. ClientDB, which is the client-side state, caches data obtained from the backend, mostly. And those data is typically stored in a normalized form. We will see what that is and why it's important and extremely useful. And finally, there's this asynchronous transaction subsystem, which is used from the UI code to trigger local and remote mutations, changes, data loads. And if we zoom into this part, how the data is combined with the front-end code to actually produce the UI that we see. Here in this chart, in graph, every rectangle is a component, and it has a parent component, and the top component is called root. So if component needs the data, in Fulcro, it describes what data it wants using a query. Here, the queries are represented as differently shaped shapes. And each parent component includes the query of its children up to the root. So the root essentially has the query for the whole page. This query is combined with the ClientDB, the data cache, to produce a tree of data. And the tree of data is passed to the root component as its properties, or props for short. And the root component splits the data and passes the relevant parts to the children that wanted them. And we will see how that works in practice. So what does the Fulcro component look like in the code? We can see that here. We use the defsc macro, which means defined stateful component. Give it some name. It gets two arguments, a reference to itself and the props it got either from Fulcro if it's the root component or from its parent component. Then there's a map of config options, which typically include the query, its identifier, and other stuff. And finally, the body, which produces the DOM that should be rendered. You see that we use functions for that to make a div and heading 1. And inside, we can refer to the props that we got to include them in the UI that we are producing. And we can, in a similar way, we can call child components to render themselves. We will learn a number of terms today, such as component, component tree, data tree, mutation, transaction, ClientDB, EQL, query. You don't need to understand all of them now, but you will hopefully by the end of this workshop. And here's the link to the awesome talk. I highly recommend it. You will learn a ton, whether you work with Fulcro in the future or not.